The scorching Manila sun punished the narrow streets of Tondo neighborhood, where poverty hid among makeshift shacks and abandoned dreams. Manny Pacquiao drove his luxury car through the alleys of this place so familiar to him, feeling the weight of memories from his own difficult childhood. He had decided to visit his old neighborhood after an interview about his journey, feeling the need to reconnect with his roots, with the ground that had once been his only training stage. Children ran around his vehicle, instantly recognizing the national idol who had won 8 world titles in different categories and become a senator of the Republic. Manny smiled discreetly, observing those faces that, like his once was, carried the same spark of hope amid so many difficulties. He decided to stop the car and walk a bit, wanting to feel the warmth of those streets, the smell of food being prepared in small windows, life pulsating in its rawest and truest form. As he walked through the narrow alleys, admiring glances followed him, but Manny remained humble, greeting each person who recognized his famous face with the same simplicity as when he was just a boy selling bread to help support his family. That's when a peculiar sound caught his attention, the rhythmic noise of blows against something resistant, accompanied by determined, panting breaths, echoing from a vacant lot hidden between 2 precarious buildings. Driven by curiosity and the sound so familiar to his ears, Manny followed that cadence until he found its origin, coming across a scene that immediately transported him to his own past. A skinny boy, approximately 12 years old, was forcefully and determinedly striking, an improvised bag made of sand inside an old rice sack, hanging from a solitary tree. The boy, who hadn't noticed the world champion's presence, continued his sequence of punches with surprisingly precise technique for someone without formal training. Manny observed in silence, feeling an indescribable emotion seeing himself reflected in that young fighter, whose skinny body and hands wrapped in old rags demonstrated the same hunger for overcoming that had shaped his own journey. The boy, named Manny Rizal, had in his eyes the same fire that had once consumed Pacquiao's own heart, a burning desire to transform his reality through the only weapon he believed he possessed, his fists. Manny Rizal continued his impeccable routine of punches, alternating jabs, crosses, and hooks, without realizing he was being watched by the Filipino boxing legend. The boy had developed that discipline on his own, inspired by the stories he heard about the great Manny Pacquiao, who, like him, had been born into poverty and found in boxing a path to a better life. His family could barely put food on the table, every day with his father working as a fisherman and his mother as a washerwoman. But Manny firmly believed he could change that situation. Manny watched each of the boy's movements attentively, noticing technical errors but impressed with the natural intuition for the sport that the young man demonstrated. There was something special about that boy, a determination that transcended crude technique, an inner strength that Manny knew very well. When he finally decided to approach, Manny was startled to notice someone's presence, turning quickly, only to freeze when recognizing who stood before him. Time seemed to stop in that vacant lot in Manila, as the great champion and the little dreamer stood face to face, separated by generations, but united by the same hunger to win. The boy's eyes filled with contained tears, his chest heaving not just from physical effort, but from the overwhelming emotion of being in front of his greatest idol. Manny, in turn, felt a lump in his throat, seeing in the boy's calloused hands and bare feet the reflection of his own childhood, of the same difficulties he had faced decades ago. With a simple gesture, Manny approached the improvised punching bag, touching it lightly, while examining the creativity and ingenuity behind that rudimentary construction. Manny remained in respectful silence, observing each movement of the champion with attentive and admiring eyes. The boy's heart was racing, unable to believe that his idol was there, on the same piece of land where he spent hours training alone, dreaming of one day being like him. The decision took shape in Manny's heart at that moment, as he felt the resilience of that young fighter, and recognized in him the same indomitable spirit that had taken him to the world's greatest rings. It would not be just another casual appearance or a moment of passing inspiration. Something much greater was beginning to be born in that unlikely encounter between the established champion and the anonymous fighter from the streets of Tondo. The next morning, Bayani woke up earlier than usual, still processing the surreal encounter of the previous day, almost convinced that it had all been nothing more than an elaborate dream born from his mind desperate for hope. His small house of wood and zinc sheets was filled with the sounds of the family awakening. His mother, Ligaya, already lighting the stove to prepare the simple breakfast, while his father, Datu, organized his fishing nets for another day of hard work at Manila's sea. None of them knew about their son's encounter with the national legend, as Bayani, fearing he wouldn't be believed, had kept that moment as a secret treasure. The boy quickly swallowed the small portion of rice with dried fish that constituted his breakfast, eager to return to the vacant lot and continue his training, now with renewed motivation after the brief encounter with his idol. He hastily said goodbye to his parents and his two younger siblings, Amihan and Kidlat, who were still sleeping, sharing a single thin mattress on the floor, and ran through the dusty streets of Tondo, feeling his heart pounding with an inexplicable hope. Upon arriving at his training spot, Bayani stopped abruptly, his eyes not believing what they saw. In place of his old improvised sandbag, there was now professional boxing equipment, a legitimate punching bag, new gloves carefully arranged on a small folding table, and a handwritten note. With trembling hands, the boy took the paper, where few words completely changed his reality. Training at 4 p.m. Be ready. MP. The hours that followed were the longest in young Bayani's life, who divided his time between helping his mother with washing clothes for other families and practicing his posture and movement, following the few technical tips that Manny had given him the day before. His mind was buzzing with possibilities, with dreams that once seemed as distant as the stars, and that now, in some mysterious way, seemed within reach of his calloused hands. When the clock finally struck 4 in the afternoon, Bayani had already been at the vacant lot for more than 30 minutes, warming up and practicing punches on the new bag, feeling the difference between the professional resistance of the equipment and his old homemade sandbag. It was then that he heard the sound of a car approaching, and seconds later, the imposing figure of Manny Pacquiao appeared again, this time accompanied by an older man who carried professional training equipment, introduced as Coach Rogelio, one of the most respected trainers in the Philippines. The following weeks completely transformed Bayani's routine, who now divided his time between family responsibilities and intensive training under the direct supervision of Manny Pacquiao and Coach Rogelio. The vacant lot had been improvisationally transformed into a small training center, with the basics necessary to develop the promising skills of the young boxer. The neighborhood residents, initially curious about the frequent presence of the national celebrity, now gathered daily to watch the training sessions, transforming that small space into a community meeting point and collective hope. Bayani's parents, initially skeptical about such an important figure's sudden interest in their son, were gradually convinced of the seriousness of that opportunity after a personal visit from Manny to their humble residence. During the meeting, the champion shared his own story of poverty and overcoming, explaining how he saw in Bayani the same potential that someone had once seen in him. With the family's permission and blessing, the training intensified, with Manny providing not only equipment but also nutritional and educational support to ensure that the boy's development was comprehensive. Coach Rogelio, a man of few words but with an analytical and experienced eye, worked tirelessly to correct the technical vices that Bayani had developed in his years of self-training. The hands that once punched instinctively now learned the science behind each movement, the precise mathematics of distance, the applied physics of weight transfer, the elaborate strategy of defense and counterattack. The boy's skinny body was beginning to gain definition, his posture to exhibit the characteristic confidence of true fighters. Manny, whenever his obligations as a senator and public figure allowed, actively participated in the training, sharing not only techniques but life lessons and values that had sustained his own journey. The champion recognized in Bayani not only physical talent, but a rare emotional resilience, a capacity to absorb knowledge and adapt quickly that few athletes possessed. There was something special about that boy from the streets of Tondo, something that went beyond technique or strength, something that couldn't be taught, an unbreakable spirit. After 3 months of intensive training, Manny surprised Bayani with news that made the boy's heart almost stop. He was organizing a small amateur competition for young talents at a gym in Manila and wanted Bayani to participate, representing not only himself, but the entire Tondo community. It was the boy's first real opportunity to test his skills in a competitive environment, to show the world that just like his mentor, he could transcend the circumstances of his birth and write his own story of overcoming. The Elordi Gym, a historic temple of Filipino boxing named in honor of another national sports legend, was completely packed on the day of the youth competition. Entire families from Tondo had traveled to support Bayani, transforming the stands into a sea of handmade posters and hopeful faces. Among the illustrious spectators, politicians, celebrities, and important figures of the national sport had responded to Manny Pacquiao's personal invitation, creating an electrifying and intimidating atmosphere for the young competitors. In the ICSI locker room, Bayani felt the weight of responsibility on his still young shoulders, his hands trembling slightly as Coach Rogelio wrapped them with methodical precision. The designated opponent was Ramon Magsaysay, a 15-year-old boy from a traditional boxing academy in Cebu, with experience in competitions and technique refined by years of formal training. The difference in experience was evident, but Manny, who silently observed his protégé's preparation, trusted in the fierce determination he had cultivated in Bayani's heart during those intense months. When he finally climbed into the ring, Bayani felt small before the lights, cameras, and eyes fixed on his thin figure, wearing the simple but impeccable boxing uniform that Manny had specially provided for the occasion. On the other side, Ramon displayed the typical confidence of someone who had been there before, greeting the audience with the familiarity of a veteran. The referee called the two to the center, explained the basic rules of youth competition, and with a gesture started the match that represented much more than a simple amateur fight. It was the first chapter of the story that Bayani had dreamed so much of writing. The first round was a hard lesson for the young man from Tondo, who, nervous and anxious to impress, abandoned part of the technique he had learned and suffered from Ramon's superior experience. Precise blows hit his face and body, while his own attempts found only air or the opponent's efficient blocks. Upon returning to the corner after the initial 3 minutes, Bayani found not disappointment, but calmness in Manny's eyes, who knelt to be at the boy's height and, with few words loaded with wisdom, reminded him to breathe, to trust in the training, to fight not with desperation, but with intelligence. The transformation was visible from the second round, when Bayani emerged from his corner like a reborn fighter, movements now fluid and calculated, attentive eyes studying each pattern of the opponent, each habit and preference. It was by identifying Ramon's tendency to slightly lower his guard after launching the left jab that Bayani found his first great opportunity, connecting a precise right that made the more experienced opponent stagger for the first time. The crowd exploded in support of Tondo's son, and a discreet smile appeared on the always serious face of Coach Rogelio, while Manny Pacquiao, at the side of the ring, nodded with approval, seeing his own young reflection in the fierce determination of that boy who, 3 months earlier, was punching an improvised sandbag. The match between Bayani and Ramon evolved into a true lesson in youth boxing, with both fighters demonstrating impressive qualities throughout the 3 regulation rounds. The boy from Tondo, recovered from his initial nervousness, applied with increasing precision the lessons learned in months of intensive training, surprising not only his experienced opponent, but also the experts present, who commented among themselves about the natural talent and notable technical evolution in such a short time. Ramon, in turn, showed why he was considered a promise of Filipino boxing, adjusting his strategy and responding to Bayani's advances with the maturity of a veteran. When the bell rang indicating the end of the match, the 2 young warriors embraced, in a gesture of mutual respect that drew enthusiastic applause from the audience. Bayani's face displayed the signs of battle, a small cut above his right eyebrow and the beginning of a bruise under his left eye, but his eyes shone with a satisfaction that transcended the official result. At ringside, Manny observed with genuine pride, recognizing in that moment not just the birth of a possible future champion, but the awakening of a warrior soul who, regardless of the titles he might conquer, had already won his most important battle against the determinism of poverty. The announcement of the judge's decision generated moments of tension in the gym, victory on points for Ramon Magsaysay by a minimum margin. A murmur of discontent ran through the packed stands, but was quickly silenced by an unexpected gesture. Bayani, without any sign of disappointment, raised his opponent's arm in recognition of his fair victory, demonstrating a rare emotional maturity for someone so young. This simple act of sportsmanship won the unanimous respect of those present, including journalists who quickly transformed the technical defeat into a moral victory in the next day's headlines. In the locker rooms, away from the spotlights and applause, Bayani finally allowed a few silent tears to escape, not of sadness for the defeat, but for the overwhelming realization that his life had been irreversibly transformed. Manny, sitting next to the young fighter, then shared something that few knew. His own first official fight had also ended in defeat, a valuable lesson that taught him more about himself and about boxing than many subsequent victories. With simple but profound words, the world champion explained to the young man that the true test of a fighter is not in remaining undefeated, but in how he rises after each fall. The biggest surprise, however, came when Rogelio entered the locker room accompanied by two men in formal attire, representatives of the prestigious National Boxing Academy of the Philippines. Impressed with the performance and potential demonstrated by Bayani, they offered a full scholarship for the young man from Tondo to join the Olympic Athlete Development Program with all expenses covered, including formal education, food, housing, and naturally professional training. The dream that seemed so distant when hitting an improvised sandbag now materialized in a concrete opportunity that would change not only his life, but the destiny of his entire family. 6 years had passed since that first fight at the Alord gym, transforming the skinny boy from Tondo into a complete athlete of 18 years, whose refined technique and knockout power had built an impressive record of 22 victories in amateur boxing, including gold medals in Asian competitions and a historic qualification to represent the Philippines in the Olympic Games. Bayani's family, who had accompanied each stage of this extraordinary transformation, now lived in a comfortable house acquired with part of the sponsorships that the young talent had attracted. Far from the extreme difficulties that had marked his childhood, Manny Pacquiao, even with his increasingly busy schedule as an influential political figure, never stopped following the evolution of his protégé, participating in key moments in his career and serving as a mentor not only for technical boxing issues, but for the challenges of growing fame and the temptations that accompanied success. The bond between them had transcended the initial relationship of idol and fan or even coach and pupil, evolving into a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values, where Bayani frequently sought advice on how to use his platform to give back to the community that had supported him from the beginning. It was precisely this desire to give back that led Bayani to initiate, with Manny's support, a social project in the same vacant lot where they had met, transforming it into a community boxing center for children and young people from Tondo. What had begun as a small local initiative quickly gained national projection, attracting support from companies, celebrities and authorities, impressed with the inspiring story behind the project and the positive results it was already showing, keeping dozens of young people away from drugs and crime through the discipline and values of the sport. On a particularly significant afternoon, while supervising the training of more than 30 children in the now well-equipped community center, Bayani noticed a particular boy who was training alone in a corner, hitting one of the punching bags with poor technique but unwavering determination. There was something familiar about that scene, something that immediately transported Bayani to his own past, to the moment that had changed his life. The boy's name was Dakila, a 10-year-old orphan who lived with an elderly aunt and who, according to the instructors, demonstrated not only natural talent for boxing, but an exceptional work ethic and resilience for his age. That night, while sharing his observations with Manny during one of their regular meetings, Bayani realized the extraordinary cycle that life had created. He now found himself in the position that his mentor had occupied years ago, with the opportunity to identify and nurture promising talents, to extend the same hand that had been extended to him. With Pacquiao's blessing and support, Bayani decided to personally take on Daquila's training, thus beginning a new generation of the mentorship chain that had started with a casual encounter in a vacant lot in Tondo, perpetuating the legacy of opportunities and transformation through sport. The bright lights of the Araneta Coliseum, the historic Manila arena that had witnessed some of Manny Pacquiao's most memorable fights, now illuminated a moment that few could have imagined on that distant day in a vacant lot in Tondo. Bayani Rizal, at 24 years old, was preparing for his first defense of the world featherweight title, an extraordinary feat achieved just 6 months after his transition to professional boxing, following in the footsteps of his mentor. The packed stands vibrated with the contagious energy of a nation united around its new hero, Filipino flags waving throughout the stadium. In the locker room, away from the frenzy of the crowd, a moving scene unfolded as Manny Pacquiao, now an even more prominent political figure but eternally linked to the sport that had consecrated him, personally helped wrap his protégé's hands. The words between them were few, but loaded with meaning, a communication that transcended the need for long speeches. Beside them, watching attentively every movement, was Daquila, now a 16-year-old teenager with his own impressive record in amateur boxing, completing the virtuous cycle of mentorship that had been established. Bayani's family occupied places of honor near the ring, his parents, now gray-haired but with eyes bright with pride, his siblings, who had found their own paths inspired by the firstborn's determination, and dozens of children and young people from the Tondo Community Center, for whom special tickets had been reserved, offering them not just a sporting spectacle, but a tangible lesson about the power of dreams, backed by hard work and opportunities. When he finally climbed into the ring to face his challenger, an experienced Mexican with 30 victories in his record, Bayani carried not only the hopes of a nation but the responsibility of representing a story greater than himself. A narrative of overcoming that had begun in the dusty streets of Tondo and now inspired millions through documentaries, books, and reports detailing the unlikely connection between the great champion and the boy with the sandbag. Each movement in the ring, each precise blow, each calculated dodge was not just a demonstration of refined technique, but a testimony to the extraordinary transformation that sport could operate when combined with proper guidance and genuine opportunities. Victory came in the 7th round, with a characteristic left hook that had become his trademark, learned directly from Manny during those first months of intensive training. The arena exploded in celebration as the referee ended the count, declaring Bayani the winner by knockout and still world champion. The cameras captured the emotional moment when, after the initial celebrations, Bayani came down from the ring to embrace not only Manny, but also Daquila and the children from the social project, in a symbolic gesture that conveyed his most important message. The true championship was not in the golden belt, but in the ability to extend a hand to those who were still fighting for their chance. In the post-fight interviews, broadcast live to millions of viewers around the world, Bayani surprised everyone by announcing the expansion of the social project to 10 new community centers in different impoverished regions of the Philippines, with the support of Manny Pacquiao and companies that had been moved by the cause. What had begun as a casual encounter between an established champion and a determined boy training with an improvised sandbag had transformed into a national movement of transformation through sport, proving that sometimes the true legacy of a champion is not measured only by titles won, but by lives transformed and dreams made possible along the way. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to our channel.